It started as a bold challenge, Ron DeSantis, confident and ready to dominate the stage. But within minutes, Zohran Mamdani flipped the entire room with nothing but calm precision and the truth. By the third question, DeSantis wasn't just losing the debate. He was looking for a way out. The lights were blinding, the cameras were rolling, and the air inside the auditorium felt electric. This wasn't your usual political forum. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark. And that spark came the moment DeSantis leaned into the microphone, pointed across the stage, and said the words that froze the room. "You want a real debate? Let's go." The audience gasped, caught between shock and anticipation. There were murmurs, chairs shifted, and all eyes turned toward the man he had just challenged. Zohran Mamdani, wearing a crisp navy blazer and an expression of sharp calm, Mamdani didn't flinch. He didn't glance toward the moderators or look to his team for guidance. He met DeSantis' stare and, with a steady voice that cut through the tension, answered, "I was born ready." The crowd stirred again, this time with something that felt closer to awe. A moment earlier, this had been a structured event. Another panel discussion filled with sound bites and rehearsed lines. But now it had transformed into something no one had expected. A live, unscripted clash between two political forces who couldn't be more different. DeSantis had been in his usual form all evening, commanding the room with his trademark bravado, peppering his answers with sharp jabs and controlling the tempo like a showman. But he had clearly underestimated who was sitting across from him. Mamdani hadn't spoken much up to that point. He listened. He calculated. And when the moment came, he didn't just rise to it. He owned it. The moderators looked uncertain. This wasn't part of the schedule. There were no rules for what was happening. But with the audience buzzing and cameras capturing every second, they knew better than to intervene. This was no longer their show. DeSantis sat up straighter in his chair. He believed he'd put Mamdani on the spot. In his mind, he was setting the stage to show dominance. Classic strategy. But Mamdani wasn't rattled. He leaned back, crossed his legs, and waited for the first real question. And in that pause, those few seconds of silence, you could feel the shift. This wasn't the first time someone tried to throw Mamdani off balance. As a former public defender, he'd faced tougher opponents in rougher settings. He wasn't a stranger to heat. In fact, he thrived in it. DeSantis, meanwhile, was performing for the room. That's what he knew best. Create a moment, seize attention, deliver a punchline. But this wasn't a rally. This wasn't a crowd built only to cheer him on. It was a mixed audience, curious, skeptical, and ready to listen to whoever could prove they had something real to say. And Mamdani was ready. The moderator, still slightly stunned, regained composure and leaned forward. "All right," he said cautiously. "If both candidates agree, we'll proceed. A direct debate. First question coming up." There it was, official. DeSantis had opened a door, and Mamdani had walked right through it. But this wasn't just political theater anymore. This was a real-time battle of ideas, experience, and clarity. One side brought years of spotlight and spectacle. The other brought truth born from the ground up, from the courtrooms, from neighborhoods overlooked, from people who felt forgotten. The tension on stage was thick. DeSantis adjusted his cufflinks and scanned the crowd, looking for energy to ride. Mamdani didn't move. He wasn't looking for energy. He already had it. This wasn't just a clash of parties or policies. It was a confrontation between two entirely different visions of leadership. And the audience? They were leaning in, not because someone yelled louder, but because, for the first time that night, they sensed something unpredictable, something raw, something real. DeSantis may have thrown the first punch with his challenge, but everyone in the room would soon learn Mamdani wasn't there to spar. He was there to make a point, and he wasn't going to miss. The first question dropped like a hammer, echoing through the charged silence that had followed DeSantis' on-stage challenge. What does it truly mean to fight for the people of this country? It was simple in wording, but heavy in implication. This wasn't a question about numbers or budgets. It was a test of heart, experience, and authenticity. A real answer couldn't be memorized. It had to be felt. DeSantis went first. He leaned forward, planting his elbows on the table like a seasoned performer stepping into the spotlight. Nobody, he said with a smirk, has fought harder for the American people than me. I've cut taxes, secured the border, brought jobs back. I didn't sit in offices writing policy papers. I fought the media, the bureaucrats, the establishment. I fought for you. Some heads in the crowd nodded. The tone was familiar, strong, assertive, and full of absolute confidence. This was the DeSantis people had come to expect, a figure who leaned into battle, made bold claims, and kept his narrative clear. He sat back satisfied. Then the room turned to Zohran Mamdani. He didn't rush. He didn't adjust his mic or strike a pose. He simply sat upright, let a breath out, and began to speak in a calm, steady voice. Fighting for the people means showing up when no one's watching, he said. It means being there when the cameras aren't rolling. Not to take credit, but to take responsibility. The room quieted. Mamdani wasn't speaking in slogans. He was speaking from experience. I grew up in a community where politicians only showed up when it was time for votes. They'd smile, take pictures, and disappear. I remember my mom working double shifts just to keep the lights on. I remember classmates who were smarter than me but never had the same chances because of the system stacked against them. That's what shaped me. His voice didn't waver. It didn't need to. Before I ever stood here, I was a public defender. I wasn't making speeches. I was in courtrooms every day, fighting to keep young black men from disappearing into a system that never saw their humanity. Mamdani glanced toward DeSantis briefly. You say you fought for the people, but you fought from the top. I've been fighting from the bottom. That sentence landed hard. There was a beat of silence, not the kind that comes from boredom or confusion, but the kind that follows something true. DeSantis shifted in his seat. His usual retorts, the fast comebacks and crowd pleasers, none of them seemed to fit, because this wasn't a personal attack. Mamdani hadn't insulted him. He had simply drawn a line and made it clear where he stood. For some folks, Mamdani continued, fighting for the people means writing executive orders. For me, it meant sitting across from a scared teenager and telling him I'd fight like hell to keep him out of prison for something he didn't do. And not just once, but every single day. He leaned back, his hands folded in front of him. You don't get to call yourself a fighter because you shouted the loudest. You earn that title by showing up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The audience didn't erupt in applause. They didn't cheer wildly. They just watched, processing, taking it in. Because in that moment, Zohran Mamdani wasn't just answering a debate question. He was showing them who he was. DeSantis opened his mouth as if to respond, but then stopped. There was nothing to interrupt, no insult to refute, only the weight of real life, something not even his years in the spotlight could counter. The moderator, trying to stay composed, thanked both speakers and moved to the next question. But something had already shifted. DeSantis may have been the one to throw down the challenge, but Mamdani had answered it in a way he hadn't expected. Not with fire, but with facts, not with rage, but with reality. He didn't outshout him, he outgrounded him, and everyone watching, whether they agreed or not, could feel it. The moderator didn't waste time. Sensing that the debate had taken on a life of its own, he pushed forward with the next question, this time with a sharper edge. Can you describe a moment when your integrity was truly tested under pressure, with real consequences on the line? It was the kind of question that could corner a politician or reveal their core, one that couldn't be spun with buzzwords. You had to answer it with something real or risk sounding empty. DeSantis went first again. He squared his shoulders and spoke with the force of someone who had weathered many storms. There were a lot of moments, believe me, he began, but one of the biggest was during the investigations thrown at me. Witch hunts, total scams designed to destroy me politically, financially, personally. He gestured with open hands, palms to the crowd. Most people would have folded. They'd have said, forget it, this is too much. But I didn't. I stood tall because I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. I kept going. That's integrity, not running when it gets hard. He looked out over the crowd, expecting the applause that usually followed such declarations. There were scattered claps, polite but subdued. The audience was listening, but they were no longer just reacting. They were measuring. Now it was Zohran Mamdani's turn. He didn't start right away. He let a pause linger just long enough to make the room feel the weight of the question. Then he leaned forward. "My integrity was tested before I ever got to Washington," he said quietly. "I was a young lawyer, fresh out of law school, working as a public defender. I had a client, 17 years old, accused of armed robbery. The evidence was flimsy, a single eyewitness who later admitted they couldn't clearly see anything. But the prosecution wanted a win." He drew in a breath. You could tell this wasn't just a story, it was a memory. They offered a deal, 10 years if he pleaded guilty. If he went to trial and lost, he'd get 30. He begged me to tell him what to do. His voice dropped barely above a whisper. I looked at him. I saw a kid who never had a chance, a kid scared out of his mind, and I told him the truth. "If you didn't do it, we're gonna fight it, no matter what it costs." There wasn't a sound in the auditorium, not even a cough. I knew I might lose that case. I knew I'd be blamed if it went badly. But integrity means standing with people when they have no one else. Not because it's easy, not because it makes you look good, but because it's the right thing. He paused, letting his words sink in. We went to trial and we won. He walked out of that courtroom free, and he still sends me messages to this day, just to say thank you. Mamdani leaned back, letting the story settle. That's integrity under pressure, he finished. Not because someone's watching, not because your name's on a building, but because someone's life is in your hands. The impact was immediate and undeniable. DeSantis, usually quick to retake control, remained still. It wasn't that he didn't have something to say, it was that Mamdani's answer wasn't political. It was personal, unrehearsed, unfiltered. You can't argue with a lived moment like that. You can only listen. And the audience was doing exactly that. Even those who came expecting fireworks were struck by something deeper. Vulnerability paired with strength. Mamdani hadn't raised his voice, he hadn't insulted anyone, but he had shifted the room again just by being real. DeSantis tried to regain footing. I admire that story, he said with a forced smile. But being president is a lot bigger than one case. We're talking about countries, armies, trillions of dollars. That's real pressure. Mamdani nodded. And if you don't know what it feels like to have one person's life depend on your decision, he replied, how can you carry the weight of millions? It wasn't a zinger, it was a warning, and this time DeSantis didn't respond. It was the third question. And though no one knew it at the time, this would be the moment Ron DeSantis' confidence finally cracked. The moderator, now fully aware of the stakes, didn't ease up. He leaned forward and read the next prompt carefully. What would you say to a working-class family struggling to make ends meet, one that doesn't trust either political party anymore? It was a question wrapped in disillusionment. No statistics, no charts, just a plea for honesty. DeSantis, perhaps sensing he needed to regain ground, jumped in before the moderator even finished. I'd say this, he began, pointing at the crowd. You were better off when I was in charge. Prices were lower, jobs were up. The world respected us. You had money in your pocket. That's what people care about. Not speeches, not emotions. Results. He paused for applause. Some came, but it wasn't the full wave he wanted. He kept going louder. Now people are tired of talk. They want someone who can win, who can bring back the deal, shut the border, protect your neighborhoods. I've done it before and I'll do it again. It was classic DeSantis, fast, bold, and full of punchlines. He ended with a smirk, confident. He had just landed a clean blow. Then came Zohran Mamdani's response, and the moment everything changed. He didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. He simply folded his hands and said, You're right. People are tired, but not just of talk. They're tired of being lied to. The room froze. The words hung in the air like smoke. You keep saying they were better off under you, he continued. But let's talk about that working class family. Maybe they lived in Texas where I'm from. Maybe they worked 2 jobs, still couldn't afford health insurance, and had to choose between medicine and groceries. DeSantis scoffed under his breath, but didn't speak. Mamdani leaned in. Maybe their rent went up. Maybe their local school lost funding. Mamdani leaned in. Maybe their cousin got laid off when a factory closed, despite all the promises you made about saving American jobs. He didn't blink. And when they looked for help, they didn't find a leader. They found a man on a golf course, tweeting insults. A quiet murmur swept through the crowd. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. DeSantis' face tightened. The charm was gone. The smirk disappeared. He tried to cut in. "That's fake." But Mamdani didn't let him. "No, sir," he said. "This isn't fake. This is what I hear in living rooms across the country. Not at fundraisers, not at country clubs. On front porches, in churches, in clinics. I don't need a private jet to understand their pain. I've lived it." Mamdani wasn't just debating anymore. He was testifying. "And you know what?" he continued. "Those families want truth. They want someone who doesn't just remember them during elections. They want clean water, safe streets, fair pay and dignity. They want a president who sees them, not just his own reflection." That sentence cut deep. DeSantis, usually quick to jab back, said nothing. He shifted in his seat. His hand twitched toward his water bottle, then stopped. It wasn't that he was silenced. It was that he was stunned. For the first time on stage, he looked like he wanted the moment to end. Mamdani finished his response with a slow, steady voice. "I don't have all the answers, but I'll never pretend I'm the only one who matters. Because when you're elected to lead, it's not about your name, your brand, or your revenge. It's about service." And with that, Mamdani leaned back. The silence was long, uncomfortable. Not even the moderator moved. It was the moment DeSantis realized this wasn't just a bad night. It was a mistake. He had thrown out a challenge thinking it would be entertainment, a victory lap, a spotlight he could control. But instead, he had invited someone to the table who wasn't there to play. Zohran Mamdani didn't just out-talk him. He out-grounded him, out-felt him, and out-connected with the very people DeSantis claimed to represent. And now all he could do was sit there and regret it. The air in the room had changed. You could feel it thick with tension, heavy with realization. The audience, once lively and reactive, now sat in silence, absorbing what they had just witnessed. Ron DeSantis, usually untouchable in moments like this, seemed human, slower, less sure of himself. Meanwhile, Zohran Mamdani remained calm, poised, and unshaken, and there was still one question left. The moderator, slightly more cautious now, glanced between the two before reading the final prompt. "What do you want the American people to remember about you after tonight?" It wasn't a question about policies, polls, or performances. It was personal. And final, DeSantis leaned into the mic, his voice noticeably lower than before. "I want the American people to remember that I fought," he said. "I took on everyone, the establishment, the media, the deep state, because I care about this country. I didn't need to run. I had everything. But I did it anyway because I love America." He paused and looked directly at the camera. "I made America strong. I made it respected. And I'll do it again." There was no applause this time, just silence. He sat back, his expression tight. He had said what he wanted, but even he seemed unsure if it had landed. Then it was Mamdani's turn. He didn't hesitate. "I want the American people to remember that I listened," he began. "That I didn't come here to talk about myself, but to speak for those who never get a microphone." Mamdani's voice, though soft, filled the entire space. "I didn't grow up with power. I wasn't born into wealth. I've been broke. I've been underestimated. I've had doors slammed in my face, but I kept going because I knew that somewhere, someone was waiting for someone like me to stand up for them." He looked out across the audience, row by row, like he was seeing every single face. "I don't promise that everything will be easy. I don't promise to be perfect, but I do promise this. I will never forget who I'm fighting for. I will never put my name above the people, and I will never back down from doing what's right." His voice didn't shake, it didn't rise, but it carried weight. "And when the cameras turn off," he continued, "when the lights dim and the spin begins, I want you to remember this. There's a difference between a performer and a public servant. One lives for applause, the other lives for accountability." That last line hit hard, not just because of who was sitting across from him, but because everyone watching knew exactly what he meant. He gave a small nod to the moderator. That's all, he said. DeSantis didn't respond. He didn't try to interrupt. He didn't lean in. He simply sat there, hands clasped, lips pressed together. For once, he didn't have the last word. The moderator, clearly aware of the gravity of what had just happened, took a deep breath before thanking both candidates. The stage lights dimmed, the mics went cold, and the moment, though over, stayed with everyone in that room. People got up slowly, not in a rush to beat traffic, but as if they were leaving a courtroom after a final verdict, because that's what it felt like, a trial of leadership, character, and purpose. And the outcome, Ron DeSantis had shown what he always shows: confidence, defiance, and boldness. But Zohran Mamdani had done something more. He had revealed truth, not the kind you measure with numbers, but the kind that comes from lived struggle, from showing up, from meaning every word you say. As the stage emptied and the night drew to a close, one thought hung in the air like a whisper. He challenged him, and he never saw him coming.